Thank you. See ya.
Wait a few minutes here. And what have we got? 11 people. You know, several of you went to the last one, so it will be the same, but questions might be different by now.
No, we have a meeting.
I guess we may as well get started. We do have one person who said she was coming in at 5, but I think, and I told her it was fine. So let me share the screen. And so is everybody seeing the AIA honors thing?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is the official show that the AIA puts together and updates every year for going through it. And just as a companion to this, this is the page of the AIA website at aia.org. When you find the fellowship, and this is where most of the instructions are. And one thing I just want to remind people, and we'll come back to this after we go through the show, is on the submission button right here. It gives you, it's the page where you just see all the examples of successful submissions.
Mhm.
The very, very bottom is additional resources, which is one thing, and it's this show. So you can find the show online and just download the PDF. But I think I forgot to mention that last time, and it's the one place you can just grab it. So that said, I'm going to go back to the show. And find the advanced button. So what we're going to go over, which we did last time, and hopefully I'll get through it painlessly and fairly quickly, is the overview of what the program is, and then the important dates, the submission requirements, the objects, which is for many people a tough one to decide what's the appropriate object to be in, a little bit of background on the jury, and then the resources that I just were pointing to you on the website. And then we can answer questions. Also, Yanel and Will are joining me as recent recipients of their own fellowship, who can answer questions having done it. Mine's a little clouded in history, so they're a little more current. And I hate to admit it, I'm pre-computer submissions. So, but I have followed carefully. And Yanel just actually had the delayed elevation in Washington last year after waiting through the virus through 2 canceled investitures.
And I was the sponsor of someone who got elevated this year. So now I have both perspectives.
There you go.
All right.
And all hats off to sponsors. They're unsung heroes in this whole process. So the overview, the College of Fellows is about 70 years old now, and it was kind of, they organized it to recognize people, I think selflessly, to thank people who are, really work hard and have a passion for things, but also to elevate the AIA in the public side by recognizing particular people who are doing particular things across as wide a range as possible, not just design or just practice, but as wide a range as possible. So I think there's about 3,000 fellows right now. So it's about 3% of the membership. But you know, we try to make it a great distinction, but at the same time, I think we're eager to have people join and be recognized for the things that they've done. So this is the purpose. There's actually a more stated specific purpose within the College of Fellows. But and maybe I should remind people, being selected to the College of Fellows is an AIA function. Once you're in, the things that are done are a College of Fellows function. So investiture is actually a handoff as one organization identifies you and gives you to the other organization. So part of the idea is good old networking and exchanging ideas, and a big part of the theory is fellows are kind of usually on the cutting edge of doing things either in design or practice or society, and they can share ideas and best practices. We still want to promote the AIA, and so we're out in the forefront, presumably, of the AIA, whether we're older and being recognized for things we've done over a long career, or we've done something more recently that's of particular value to the AIA. And we clearly want to advance the profession. One of the biggest things that we focus on, though, is mentoring younger architects and supporting research. And supporting research hasn't made it to this list yet, but we do raise money and give money to grants within the AIA, the Upjohn grants, which are smaller research grants, and the Big Latrobe grant, which is a fair amount of money, a couple $100,000 over 2 years. And we have several programs for young architects. We created the Young Architects Forum, so there was an organization that young architects could network with each other. So this is, I think, sort of the good news. That this is not an impossible hurdle. This past year, there were 219 candidates and 88 were elevated. So about 40% of the people who submit are elevated. And if you're not elevated the first year, you get to do it 2 more years. And so there are smaller and smaller percentages come from the second, third year because so many get nominated each year. But it pays off because some percentage of the elected, elevated people have done it 2 or 3 times before they finally got in. And the 7% for the third year doesn't mean only 7% of the third year people did. 7% of the people who are elevated did it in their third year. The other is the object, and we'll come back to the object since no one knows what they are, but design is object 1, and that's about 20% of it. The single biggest object is practice. That's practice management and practice technology. And so that's almost half the fellowships come through the practice. There's a small percentage from who contribute to the Institute, and then there's these several other objects, which we'll come back to in detail. This is the key thing, the dates. And so the submission period opens in whatever that is, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you can officially get onto the site, register, and begin to have a record and begin to fill it out. And it finishes in October. So end of September, early October are those crazy days when you're searching down the letter writer who never wrote their letter and some of the other information that you need. But like any RFP, those are pretty strict dates. So the submission, and they've got some kind of buzzwords here about what's a good submission, and it's absolutely no different than submitting for a building award. You need to be clear, you need to say what the objective was and whether there was a resolution. And one of the things you'll see throughout this proposed submission process is the jury likes to see that you influenced the profession. You influenced other professionals, you spoke, you wrote, you did things, but that what you did wasn't in a vacuum. It's for the good of the profession, for the good of the Institute. So that's a pretty simple, straightforward process. And the jury gives feedback to honors and awards. They are reorganizing honors and awards this year, and I don't quite know the person who used to manage it last year has changed. And I don't know who the new person is yet. I know who the senior person is still there, Daniel Lobo, but the person assigned to fellowship is being reassigned. But the submission tips are almost always the same. Be real straightforward. Don't be shy about bragging. I think the jury's still out on third person versus first person, but you need to be really clear what happened. So you say what you did, why you did it, why it's important, and then give some evidence that it was shared. You know, it was printed up in the magazine, you got an award, all those kinds of things. They love it. They're not evaluating your design or your programs or your projects. They prefer it when a third party, they're evaluating whether you did those things or not. They like it when a third party gives some endorsement of it, you know, that you did get an award or someone did write an article about something. So you need to be good standing for 10 years. These now, they've clarified that these are cumulative years, not 10 years with no breaks. Too many people sort of slipped out during the big recession in 08. And so these rules were revised to just say 10 years in total. And you can call them and check to make sure. We had somebody last year who she hadn't qualified at the submission date, but she had qualified by the jury date. And so they were very screwed up and she had to postpone a year. So there's two ways to be nominated. And now I'm assuming everybody here is either nominated or by the chapter or nominated by petition and hopefully plans to submit. But you can either get 10 architect members, 5 fellows, or have the chapter do it. A lot of the chapters don't necessarily have honors and awards committees. So in those cases, smaller chapters in particular use the petition more. The bigger chapters tend to use the component, either the state or like the BSA. And if you're sometimes towards the last month or so, Eric and whoever's the honors and awards chair will arrange to have the document signed that clarifies that you're nominated. So these are the parts of the submission, and we'll go through them one by one. So you have the nomination, and then you have your sponsor letter. And the sponsor, you select your sponsor. They kind of live with you through this whole thing, and they summarize. They recommend you, and then you give a summary of your statement. And we usually talk about this in terms of a 35-minute word elevator speech about yourself and a page or more that summarizes what the rest of the document's going to say. And those are good things to have early because they're good to share with your letter writer and they're good to share with your sponsor. And then you have essentially a list of significant work, honors and awards and publications. That's sort of resume format stuff. And then the summary of achievements, more prose approach. And in section 3 is your list, like project sheets or program sheets that you would list with. And then you end the whole thing with 7 letters from references. So, and then this is just a rephrasing of the be clear, be concise, say what's on your mind quickly and strongly. So the sponsor letter is really important. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the reference letter is not quite as much because they've read everything else by now and have formed some opinions, but they can tip you one way or the other. It's really important that you're a good submission. I've seen some in the past, people are cramming more and more onto a page and almost to the point of being clear. I'm sure later in here, they'll say something about white space, I seem to recall. But really well organized, use the exact same titles as the criteria in this. It's 40 pages, 8.5 by 11. They look at this on the screen at home when they first review them and then as a group when they talk about them. So landscape format is to your advantage. It's not required, but it's preferred. 10 points is the minimum font, primarily because they are going to sit around in a room and look at them on the screen. The summary statement is important. We're architects, so the images, high quality images are important. And they want to see consistency through your career. This is not really an award for generalists. Even if you are a good generalist, you have to pick some component of what you're doing where you're really focusing your passion so they get it. Ideally, you've risen to some level of leadership within your area, and you can point to some results that have happened because of your involvement. So the sponsor is a really big deal, and one of the first things you do, they should be an FAIA or an AIA member in good standing. It's good for them to be able to attest to knowing you over a long part of your career and multiple parts of your career. So if you're teaching and practicing both, it'd be good if they knew a little of both. If you've worked with government agencies and also in private practice in a similar, in housing or something, it'd be good if they knew how you worked from both sides of the table. So it's good to have them know you. People sometimes feel just getting somebody famous is a good way to go. And mostly what we found is that multiple people ask them, they don't write very distinctive letters between people, and they're often pressed for time. And so it's not necessarily the best thing to do. Maybe better for a reference letter. They recommend it not be somebody from your own firm because they have suspicious motives, that's encouraging you or saying things just because it's good marketing for the firm. So most sponsors, you can ask them if they're sponsoring more than one person, but if they are, make sure that there's nothing general between the two. And they then are kind of your chaperone to the rest of this sponsor, the whole process. We hope that they, will sit down with you and read it and tell you if it's clear or not. They'll write their own letter. They'll read your statement and go through it with you. And one of the most important tasks is, while you're finishing up your part of it, is that they chase your letter writers. I recommend that you obviously contact your letter writers in the first place, put them together with your sponsor, and actually tell your letter writers what aspect of your career you would like them to address. So even though you're narrow focusing on something you're particularly interested in, if you teach with one person or you're in practice with another, or somebody's a student or an employee or an old boss, they each talk about a different aspect of your career so that you paint a full picture and you don't have 7 letters repeating the same 6 general things. So it makes the reference letters easier to write. So it's 1 page. It's addressed to the jury chair, and you do get to see the sponsor letter. The reference letters are confidential, but the sponsor letter you read, they upload it as part of your own submission, and they kind of get things going for the rest of the submission. They're very specific. I usually recommend you can talk about something as specific as what's in this submission and why it's there, just so that early on in this proposal, you get what the person is trying to do. Then there's the summary. And in section 1, the summary is this single letter, single page, could be 2 pages, as long as you're under the total. But it doesn't want to go on too far. Most people, I think, tend to write prose. Some people talk about what got them interested in architecture in the first place. Usually it doesn't want to be more than 3 main points. And if you can write a 35-word piece with 3 main points highlighted in it, then each of those 3 points can be evolved a little in this summary letter. And ideally, the sponsor has touched on them, so it's not a surprise after the sponsor letter to find out you're totally involved in climate change, or you're totally involved in housing advocacy, or one of those things. So a little bit of overlap with the sponsor letter. And again, this ripple effect is just some emphasis that you are making an effort that this reaches others in the profession. And then later you can do evidence that it's reaching others in the profession. Oh, you're defining what ripple effect means. Ripple effect shows up in this show several times, but it's more than just you're doing your job. So any way that you might be doing it, talking at ABX or going to AIA conventions or writing, they do ask you to distinguish whether you did the writing yourself or whether the writing was about you by somebody else. Point out your service to the profession. And they mentioned geographic impact, and the jurors I've talked to, it is nice if there's a sense that your ripple effect is not here at home. And sometimes it's almost gratuitous, like some of your reference letters are from people far away who saw you at a conference or joined a panel with you or something like that. So anything that can help you, even if you knew them here and now they've moved somewhere else, it's helpful to sort of see a national spread of people that are involved in your submission. It's usually nice to have your sponsor close at hand just because you can grab them, but even that's not really necessary if you're in contact. So section 2 is a more of a resume style, almost list formatted. I recommend people use headlines because they want to hear what your accomplishments have been. And they have given these sort of categories: projects, jury service, presentations, AIA committees, volunteer committees, and other things. And so it's good to have use those headings and then list them. Inevitably, some things you do will show up in more than one place, and you may mention them in a summary, and they'll show up again under a project and also AIA involvement. It's inevitable, but you want to avoid trying to pad it so much that it looks like each of these things could be the same, because one called accomplishments and then the next one's called honors, awards, and recognition. And it's kind of easy to start overlapping the two of them. And then finally, by you and about your work. So you want to distinguish between the ones you wrote, the ones that wrote about you, and the ones that wrote about a project. And of course, it would be a project relevant to whatever your submission is about. A lot of people, one of their big concerns is they haven't done a lot of AIA per se. And I think, and of course, this is an AIA award, so it's a little bit biased towards AIA stuff. But the jury works a little bit overtime to make sure that, if you're working with Habitat for the Humanity a lot, or if you're working with some community organization for underprivileged youth, that's as good as working for the AIA, as long as you can build a story around it, that it's not just a one-off. So just other tips for it. This is group similar accomplishments together. I say go farther, label it so you know what those things are. Keep pointing you, don't make a case for the organization. Talk about what you did. Explain time gaps. Some people, have gone to some other career direction and come back and things like that. Or they've stopped working for a practice and have come back to a practice and in between did something. You want to make sure you treat that right. Again, whether you wrote the article, apparently there's a lot of confusion when people start listing the articles because nobody's going to read them. Nobody's actually going to do more than see the label. In section 3 is the exhibits. Now, if you're in design, these are pictures of projects. And even here, if you do religious architecture, but you're really proud of a hotel and an office building you did, if your whole point is religious architecture, no matter how nice those other two projects are, they're not reinforcing your story. So the exhibits really should reinforce your story, that you're all about community centers and forming community, and you're in community committees, and your buildings tend to reinforce community, and the whole thing works together. You do have to explain what you did, and you have to get someone to confirm you did it. But you do get to talk about what the challenge was, what you did. And so some people, it's not the whole building. Some people, it's the envelope. Some people, it's, incredible mechanical system or a new approach to facade screening. And and you talk about your role, so it doesn't have to be the whole thing. The exhibits, if they are buildings, they prefer finished projects unless you're so specifically about some construction aspect or something like that. If you're in design, you can show more than the 5 minimum. If you're in any of the categories, you want to still, people still want to be seen as architects or involved in the built environment. So you still put some projects. You don't have to put them first. In fact, you don't necessarily put them first. So if you're not in design, if you're teaching, you might put some student work in. You would explain what this class assignment was and put things like that in. If you're working for a government agency or a private agency as a owner's representative, you could show projects that you managed or that you developed some unique management process for. So all of those sort of work together. And you can put pictures of, flow charts you worked with, meetings you were in, community sessions you were leading, things like that. And then still put a few projects in after that. It's really almost more like a magazine than a project sheet, though you want to identify things and make sure people understand what they're looking at. Then these are the letters. They have to be confidential. So your sponsor is going to be talking to the person, answering questions and getting a sense of them, giving them deadlines. I usually recommend that you tell somebody that they're a backup sponsor reference letter and that you may or may not need them. But I know several people who've had to call in an extra letter at the last minute when it was 2 or 3 days to go and they couldn't get a hold of somebody. But I usually say, in the 3 points you make on that letter, on the summary, each one of those you may expand 2 or 3 subpoints of that point. I would then tell the people who are writing these reference letters, here's the 12 things I'm going to say, so they know that somebody's going to cover them. And I'd like you to cover these 3 or these 4. And that way they'll know that they can fight down the urge to cover everything. And if you try to cover everything in 1 page, it's pretty minor, pretty generic. So if you can give them some specificity, they appreciate it. And your sponsor can clarify that. But they should talk specifically about you. This is a good place to get that geographic range. And this is a good place to get people who are a little better known, but who don't have to do all the work that a sponsor does. Oh, and they even mention avoid the big names. Apparently, there are many juries have commented on that. So you send a link to your writer. One of the people I sponsored, one of her writers was so non-computer literate, he couldn't do it. So he called our office and faxed the letter to our office and called the AIA and asked the question and told them he'd done that. And then she was in danger of being disqualified. So we finally negotiated negating the whole letter, ignoring it, taking him off the list and getting a last minute person. So they're really keen on this being clear. And in the last few years of looking at harassment in all its forms and racism and all those kinds of things, everyone is cleaning up. We've been doing several studies at the AIA. So part of the recent reorganization is that the fellowship and the honors and awards programs are both combined into their own section, and they report to the same person at the board level of the AIA, because these are the 2 areas where I think egregious things could slip by. And so there's much more focus on it. And so they're really clear on even something as simple as making sure that these letters are confidential. But this is where if you had some outstanding problem, we could one way we could find out about it. And everything's online now. If you're a 2nd and 3rd year applicant, your old letters are automatically still there, so you don't have to get them done, but you are allowed to add 2 more letters. presuming that something has happened in the year or two since a great new project or more speaking opportunities or things like that. So you can add those to your list, but you can also have your two new reference letters respond to them. So clear, concise presentation. Here's the white space reference. You wouldn't believe how crowded some of these pages are. And you have to be eligible. They'll let you know that right off the bat. Good sponsor. So this is all kind of common sense after the rest of the show. So there's 6 objects. The first one was design, and all the objects have evolved into separate, some of them have evolved into separate subsets. So in design, it now includes sort of design as a standalone, urban design, and historic preservation. And if you're going in design, it has to be your projects. You weren't just a project architect or something on that. This is what I was saying earlier, though. They're not evaluating whether it's good design. They would rather see an article about the building or awards that it won nationally or regionally or locally. And so that sort of really supports it. So this is pretty straightforward. And you can make the case for the design isn't just aesthetics. You can make the case that it operates somehow differently or it uses new technology, even within the design category itself. The second section is practice, and we've isolated this now. You used to have research and education as part of the same category, and practice itself was growing so big that we needed to separate the two so that we're clearer about what all your sections would be, what your lists and your periodicals, and certainly your exhibits are quite different. And practice management has 2 parts now. One is either, well, 3 parts actually. One is practice management, and the other is technical advancement. So we've been seeing people who reorganize firms or different management techniques that they've adapted from other industries or things like that. Maybe more in technical advancement, people who are looking at solar screens or sustainable enclosures or different things like that. Specialty practices are, and then the newest one is these specialty practices, because more and more architects are veering into a specific profession, advising other architects on lead registration and green design and accessibility and small houses. So there's a whole range of specialty practice now. I don't know if that many have been awarded yet, but we're seeing more and more of them. In fact, if you go back on the website, you'll see they've, in the last couple of years, subdivided them to more detail in case you're in one of these subsets. Then 3 is led the institute, and now they're making a case for a related organization. It tends to be, the institute is AIA, related organizations tend to be related to the AIA, so closer to the profession. So NAOP or NCARB or NAB or several of these other things associated with architecture or registration or education, ACSA. So if you're active in those related institutions, it counts pretty much the same, and you would be in the same object as being on the AIA. But generally, it means being on boards, possibly being president, being a director, running an important program within that organization, and be able to tie it closely to the profession. And now a ripple effect. In some ways, it's easier to show a ripple effect if you're in a national organization. Then the 4th one is public service, government, industry, or organization. And this is essentially, this would overlap with those affiliated organizations in category 3, but these are not necessarily as close to being a professional trade organization or something like NCARB or AIA or NAB or ACSA. These are, sort of good, admirable organizations that you might have committed a career to. And if it's somehow can be touched into improving the environment, that would be this category. These categories are a small percentage of the total, but there are people doing good things in these categories that we need to have the structure that we can recognize them. This is just ever increasing service to society. These are alternative careers or volunteer work you do. These are tough ones, but if you're really involved, you can often make the case for them. Like many volunteers, you have volunteer organizations, you often have to agree to, not go after it for work, not use it as marketing, keep away from working for them as a professional for X number of years. But for the fellowship, it's got to be pretty straight up volunteer, helping out. You're contributing architecture skills to an organization that's not doing architecture or directly impacting it, but benefits from having an architect on their board or on running some of their committees, things like that. And then the new one was pulling out education, research, or writing into its own category. Heavily academics, we're seeing more and more research. We're seeing practitioners who are focusing on research, and some writing. A lot of the times, education and writing, will be packed together. So those are the 6 objects. And just out of curiosity, this is the jury. If any of you are friends with these people, I think, does the next page say that? Yeah, the jury, they still have to pick 2 more people, and the chair is going to be selected from the group of people in this list, and one of the people who've already done it. These people do it for 3 years, so they get quite a bit of experience at reading these. They will recuse themselves. Someone will recuse themselves from every person. So the main reason is if you know the person, you recuse yourself from them. If you're from the same state, they'll recuse you automatically. If you in an effort to get somebody recused everywhere. And then in the end, if you're not recused and they still have some other people, they'll just assign recusals. So nobody has different numbers of people weighing in on their jury. So somebody, whether they know them or not, will be recused from every submission. And so they get like 300, might be jumping ahead here. These are all people and I wanted to make the point, they are all people who are in every category. So there's at least one person from every category, one educator, one government worker, one outside the industry, one led the institute, one practice, and one design. And then if there's still one more space on the jury, could be one of the design people is urban designer and the other design person is a historic preservation. So they bend over backwards to try to do it. These people are specifically from different regions of the AIA so that they're spread around the country. They are specifically half and half gender split, and they are as racially diverse as you can get out of the AIA at this point in time. So the jury is one of the reasons it's still some to be determined on there. I think we have 3 people who were nominated to be on the jury, so we may have a Boston person, depending on what gender they need, what category they need, what geographic area. So that's the recusal. So this is both interesting and distressing. Each juror, there's 7 jurors and there's 280 submissions or something. So they get like 40 binders. Well, they're not binders anymore. They get 40 names and they go through and learn them. They become the patron for that person. And they then get together and each of the jurors they present all 280 or 300 or whatever there is to the rest of the jurors, and they act as the presenter to those people. And they point out the things they like and they point out the things that they don't like. And they generally talk about it for 10 minutes or so. And then they quickly discard half of them before they go back and return to them. So your whole thing that you spent 1,000 hours on gets this 15, 16 minutes of review. And so it does have to kind of make a simple point. You get it. You don't have to ask questions about every picture, and you get through it. And they're a little bit blind to how many people have done in any one category or something. So that doesn't really matter. And they review the thing. So they have these initial questions that they ask things, and then that moves them into these later stages. And this is, they look at everything we just said in the first part of this presentation. Shows the ripple effect. Do they have published work? Do they win any awards? Is there something that signifies that they're showing some kind of leadership? Is it widespread? Do they share things with other people? And it's all just kind of, the jury looks at what we all said needs to be included in there. And I don't really need to. So the one thing happens is, and this is in the future, if you're not selected, the next time you come up next year, when you roll back and resubmit, they will make a point that you get a different patron than you had the time before. And one of the things that does come up is you might be submitting from design, and your person who is in your jury is historic preservation, and you're a contemporary designer, and they didn't get along, or they're an AIA board member who's reviewing a preservation designer or something. There's something that just doesn't mix. So they make a point of making sure you have somebody different. So a whole different person is making your case and presenting. And a third of the jury, of course, is new. So you get a different sense of what's going on in a different opportunity. So that's the show they give us. There are these resources, and I'll just go to AIA. You can contact, if you download this, Honors and Awards is the committee at the BSA, and they have a staff of 3 or 4 people. You really do a good job. They answer questions. If you don't get your submission accepted the first time, they give really thorough remarks. They hound the juror for comments as to how this could be improved, or what questions they still had that weren't answered by the submission. So they're really good at trying to make you get it. But if you go to the page at AIA.org, there's these 5 categories. So the dates are over here on the right, just if you need to check every 2 days to remind yourself you're not late. The first one is eligibility, and this is where there's a little more detail on the different objects. So you can see the different objects. And then there's the submission details, fee. You can look at this application. You can go to the submission site. These have links to it. You can actually look at more submissions, if you know them, than are here by contacting their archivist. If you know somebody who worked where you worked and did it, or you're in an unusual work setting and you want to find out what's going on, you can go and ask particular. But you can see here, if you look at the best examples for Object 1 design, there's 2 people that got it for design, 3 people, and 2 for preservation, and 1 for urban design. So as you refine what you're going in for, they've now refined these examples to a large extent. So they have examples for this year and last year, and we'll back to the 3 years for each of these. And there are older ones from 3 years ago. They had the earlier 3 years. So you can go here. Sometimes these are people you might know. but you can see what people did, particularly for some of the ones that aren't quite as obvious, like 4, 5, and 6, where people went in for literature or education or research. And all of these are people who were selected. So this is a pretty good place to go. The other place is, it's not a bad place to crib graphics as you go in and look at what you did. The third one is the jury. This still lists last year's jury. That's why there were those to be determined on the list. And you're not allowed to talk to them. And if they know you, they'll recuse themselves. But sometimes it's interesting to know. Past recipients, they have been, I think since 2015 or something, when we got the new website, they've been starting to list the past recipients. There's no money to go back and type in all the ones since 1952. But since 2016 or 2015, each year we have a list now automatically. So we're putting those in there. So if you do want to check people who might be potential sponsors, letter reference writers, you need another fellow to be to nominate you or write a letter. You might cruise through and see how it worked. And then the last one are just a series of facts, kind of like organized like the show we just did. What does your sponsor need to do? How do you nominate? Some of those things are all answered. So it's actually one of the better parts of the AIA website lately. And that's the presentation. We didn't do bad. Sorry if I talked too long. If I said ripple effect too often. So everybody looks muted again. You want to ask questions, and Will and Yanel can answer some more immediate personal ones. Not too personal.
I had a question. What happens if you have someone who can write a reference to you pertaining to the impact that you have done and speak closely to the impact and changes and contributions that you've done, but they're not necessarily an AIA affiliate?
2 of your 7 can be non-AIA.
Okay.
And I will add that when I did mine, I had the same situation. And what I did was some projects that I use in my exhibits, I asked the client or the individual involved that was a non-architect to write me a quote. And I put the quote in that exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
And it gave depth, without having to write a whole thing.
Yeah.
I think I saw that,
The other thing to get around it, it's nice to get your reference letters more than just, your peers in practice. So the trick is to find somebody who works for the government, who's an
Right.
agency reviewer or something, but who's also happens to be an architect and kept their AIA. It is a little tough to trick that, but the quote's an excellent idea. When each exhibit has to have somebody signing you off, and those can be non-architects too, if like
Like a witness, yeah.
Yeah, like a vice mayor can sign off that you did the courthouse or something. Or you could have a partner in your firm sign off you did the courthouse.
Got it. Thank you.
But they don't have to be AIA, those.
So I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, you used the hand. I didn't even.
I use sometimes I use a hand.
What a pro.
Yeah. You mentioned that they want to know if you are the author or if someone else has written it. Is there
in
a
articles.
preference or is it?
No.
Oh,
I think they just
in
would
articles.
like-
I thought you meant the document itself.
No.
Oh, okay,
right.
yeah.
No, that's an issue with people in general, but no, for any articles or things like that.
Okay.
And they don't actually, I don't think they necessarily prioritize which one is better. If somebody wrote about you or you wrote, because I think at least in both cases, you're getting out there. But as far as the document, you're right, lots of firms. Oh, and this is a good cue because Susan wanted me to mention one of the women, Rebecca Edmonds, said it, Susan? Rebecca Edmonds, I think, and Michael Lefevre have written a book on.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, Peter.
Oh, okay, it's in the chat.
Yeah.
Written a book on getting your F, and Rebecca writes people's and has a pretty good track record. She writes for people. And did you work with her? So she's, the two of them have written a book. The downside is it costs $125. So the BSA bought it, and you can check it out. You do have to leave a $125 deposit to check it out, but you'll get it back. And so that's one course. Our old marketing director at Cambridge 7 has done, I think, 22, she's 18 for 20 or something on writing them. And so she's a freelancer. Some firms, people who work for bigger firms, write their, have their marketing people write them or edit them at least and help lay them out. And then many people just do it themselves.
Yes, I will say, I work with Rebecca because it was recommended by Emily Grandstaff Rice. And she can dial things up or down depending how much time you need. So she can be as economical as you need it, or as involved as you need her. I found her to be a very good editor, and early in strategy, even better. And
Emily's just coming on, actually.
and then, oh, great. And then there she is. And then on the articles by you or about you, I will separate the lists so that it doesn't get muddled between the one list that includes all. And I have seen both examples, and I thought that the separating worked better.
And they're asking for that now.
Mm-hmm.
There's long been conversations about, is it fair that some people are in big firms and have marketing people and others aren't? But I think there are people who, their marketing people didn't do any better than they did, and some small firms that are great writers. But I don't think anybody's going to do anything about it.
I wrote mine. My marketing group didn't write mine.
Yeah. In the old days, when it was a little more intense, when they were laid out and you submitted a hard copy, a lot of people wrote their own, and then their marketing people, went into InDesign, and it was probably before InDesign, cranked it out. So it's a little more, there's something that's more homogenizing about the submitting it in the online. But you're still designing your page for your exhibits and things like that. So, other questions? So Will is actually also our, we have a fellows rep on the board. When Emily reorganized the board, it was a position that was created. So we have a little more connection between the fellows and the board. And then
I had to get elected this year. It was very stressful.
You feared rejection.
Yeah. Came down
There's
to the
also
wire.
there is the College of Fellows has a council with about 30 representatives from the different regions and an executive committee. And they meet not that often, but sort of quarterly, and they have a couple of annual meetings a year, or maybe one annual meeting and several regional rep meetings. So there's a certain level of organization. They also give stipends to they manage the Young Architect Awards to give stipends. They give a series of grants to chapters, about 40 grand worth of chapter grants for people doing chapters who are trying to put together programs for emerging professionals, and publish a magazine newsletter, the quarterly. So there's a series of things, and the Young Architects Forum is kind of in parallel, has their own quarterly connections, and there's a bit of relationship back and forth. A couple mentoring programs, Nexus and Align, that are both, sort of in the 2 or 3 year old range to get national mentoring a little more organized. So there are things going on besides getting the fellowship as an honor. You'll be asked for money. You'll be asked to sort of pitch in and help out, mentor, a few things like that. And we're starting to think the new fellows are the best people to do that.
Give money, you mean?
Well, any of those things. The
People
old
like
ones are sliding off.
All I can say is, you all better get it next year, because then I can hand you your medal.
Oh, yes,
I'll
she's
do it.
Brad.
All right,
She's
nice.
Brad. This is her
Can I come
flock.
back?
It doesn't work that way, but
Yeah, it's a fun ceremony. Actually, oh no, you're 23. Where's the convention?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. So that's usually a good convention.
Yeah, it'll be
If
in
you don't get
Boston.
it the second time, you don't get it, but you do get it the third time, it'll be back here in Boston.
Sure.
So anything else? Well, good luck. Give Susan or any of us, Yanel or Will or me, a call. One of the things we do with people periodically, if you feel like you want, is touch base sort of halfway through, sometime in the late summer. Take a look at how your stuff is roughing out, tell you if it seems clear to us, and by that point in time, you and your sponsor are the same person. So you're not really sponsor's not really a third eye. And we usually, get somebody. We have a committee of about 10 people who are the BSA committee. We'll have to rope you in,
I'll also
And,
say, and maybe Susan, or you could send this out to everybody who signed up today, but I'm happy to, if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can reach me by email and Susan can share that. Or if you need a second set of eyes to look over anything, I'd happy to be a backup sort of support editor as well. I think while you're in the midst of it, it's kind of hard to predict your questions now, but
yeah.
if you're going through it, and please feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah. Will, do you want to just put your email in the chat?
I can certainly do that. Sure.
Thank you.
What an idea.
Likewise for me. Yeah.
All right.
And if you contact Susan,
There
I
you
think she'll
go.
give you anybody's email.
Yeah. But you should all be shoo-ins. Imagine, Peter, if everybody here makes
Yeah,
it.
we only had 3
the,
last year. Was this, people didn't feel like submitting in that. We only had 3 submissions, right? No, I think we had a few more.
Well, one thing that was really helpful for me was to see the examples that are posted, particularly of the categories that you might be thinking of
Yeah.
representing you. And even then, looking at other categories just for formatting was really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
like
things.
Peter said, don't be afraid of white space.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to steal the things you like the look of, because it's a different jury.
Especially Yanel's, because yours was used as an example of one of the best.
Oh, I didn't look. Congratulations.
Mine is posted, and another Another friend that got elevated this year got posted in my same category. It's so cool to see
Oh, who's
those.
that?
Ricardo Alvarez Diaz.
Nice, nice.
It's really
Cool.
refreshing to see. It's almost like a career path encapsulated.
Yeah, it's a terrible chore. That section 3 is hard. Although I found out, I did a little search on my computer. I just said search for PowerPoint shows. And I suddenly found a dozen or so that, had been like Build Boston shows or things like that. That if I had just gone looking for, like, what was that thing I did back in somewhere? So kind of worked backwards that way. Okay, I guess that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for doing the work. I think it's good for all of us to see the BSA represented.
Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Take care. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.